Hi, my name is Ben Almeida Lopez, and I'll be representing the affirmative side on the first affirmative construct. For the resolve, the World Trade Organization should amend anti-dumping laws to make it more challenging to stop product dumping. We, as the affirmative side, agree with this resolve. Inherency 1. Anti-dumping laws are very subjective and do not provide an unbiased code of conduct by which all countries must comply. Inherency 2. The World Trade Organization does not strongly enforce these anti-dumping laws and provides no concrete consequence for violating the anti-dumping laws in place. Inherency 3. Many countries within the global economy currently partake in the act of dumping. Alright, harm 1. Anti-dumping laws have the potential to limit the variety of products available to the consumer and decreases the spreading of ideas between global partners. Harm 2. If anti-dumping laws were to be more strictly enforced, a heavy financial burden would be placed upon consumers, giving them limited access to cheaper goods. Harm 3. Anti-dumping laws limit competition between countries and have the potential to decrease the quality of products produced because of this. Harm 4. Anti-dumping laws can allow domestic companies to form monopolies over certain products due to lack of foreign competition. Harm 5. Anti-dumping laws give countries no place to put their surplus products that their companies make. This creates vast amounts of waste and loss of profit. Harm 6. Anti-dumping laws hurt the national economy because companies cannot benefit from international trade. Solvency. We agree that the resolve that the World Trade Organization should ease anti-dumping laws and make it more difficult to present vague and biased anti-dumping legislation. Alright, now to elaborate on some of the harms. Harm 1. Anti-dumping laws have the potential to limit the variety and quality of products available to the consumer and limit competition between countries. According to Economic and Legal Analysis of Dumping by Shruti Ojha, the abuse of anti-dumping rules hits developing countries harder whose exports are increasingly subject to such measures in recent years. Due to their less diversified economies, the dumping countries enjoy comparative advantages in only a few sectors. If the export of their competitive products is obstructed by anti-dumping measures, their foreign exchange earnings and even economic development may be negatively affected. So basically, the negative effect on developing countries can not only hinder their economy, but also obstruct their earnings. If anti-dumping laws were to be more strict, just imagine the damage a third world country would be subject to. They wouldn't be able to pay their own people because their economies would just be so damaged. Harm 2. If anti-dumping laws were to be more strictly enforced, a heavy financial burden would be placed upon consumers, giving them limited access to cheaper goods. And according to Energy Journal, EU-China Solar Battle Escalates by James Horan, while cheap Chinese imports have been bad for European manufacturers, they have been a boon for households that want to install them. So anti-dumping laws make it so that consumers have limited access to cheaper goods, which definitely hurts consumers. Anti-dumping laws generally assume that the interests of manufacturers are more important than the interests of the consumers and the citizens of the countries. Harm 3. Countries already take advantage of anti-dumping laws because of their economic and political manipulability, so they have already become too subjective to do any real good. And according to the Economic and Legal Analysis of Dumping, again by Shruti Ojha, the arbitrariness of calculation of dumping makes anti-dumping an unfair mechanism that randomly levies duties on innocent producers or exempts the real dumping producers due to non-uniformity in the applications of the anti-dumping rule. So basically, it's just very arbitrarily enforced, it's not very well defined, and it's incredibly easy to take advantage of to protect your own country in an unfair manner. Harm 4. Anti-dumping laws can allow domestic companies to form monopolies over certain products due to lack of foreign competition. And according to India-China lead global anti-dumping dance by Raja Murthy, there's always the risk of protecting local monopoly and denying the consumer a cheaper and possibly better imported product. Harm 5. Anti-dumping laws give countries no place to put their surplus products that their companies make. This creates vast amounts of waste and loss of product. And according to the Economic and Legal Analysis of Dumping, sporadic dumping is when the producer intends to dispose of the causal overstock of the producers. Sales in the specified period may not be as good as expected, and the producers may find themselves with surplus stock. They find it difficult to dispense it off in the domestic market or hold it in the next season for various reasons. Therefore, they try to sell it in the foreign markets at a lower price to recover some cost. And as demonstrated by this quote, producers need to find places to sell their surplus goods in order to maintain a profit and eliminate waste. Anti-dumping laws make it very difficult for this to happen. All right, finally, harm 6. Anti-dumping laws hurt the national economy because companies cannot benefit from international trade. And according to the Economic and Legal Analysis of Dumping by Shruti Ojha, the abuse of anti-dumping rules hits the developing countries harder, whose exports are increasingly subject to such measures in recent years. Due to their less diversified economies, the developing countries enjoy comparative advantages in only a few sectors. If export of their competitive products is obstructed by anti-dumping measures, their foreign exchange earnings and even economic development may be negatively affected. So dumping countries essentially need the economic advantage dumping provides them in order to survive in the international marketplace. So, just to elaborate further on some other points here. For harm 4, where it involves monopolies, Economic and Legal Analysis of Dumping again says that the anti-dumping lobby is unfairly strong because it has the backing of organized institutions like trade unions that can challenge dumping and thus have the authority and influence in the world to make and enact legislations that punish dumping. So consumers who benefit most from cheap products of dumping are stifled by the strong opposition of producers who are vehemently opposed to dumping. So essentially just companies will attempt to stop dumping, not because it unfairly disadvantages them specifically, but because they want to keep a hold on a specific market that if foreign trade and cheap foreign trade specifically were allowed in, they would no longer have exclusive access to.
1 minute.
Okay, so that basically is the point that we want to make here. Oh, right, our solvency. So again, we agree with the resolve that the World Trade Organization should ease anti-dumping laws and make it more difficult to present vague and biased anti-dumping legislation.
Thank you, Ben. So I have a few questions for you. First of all, you mentioned dumping in relation to third world countries. Were you referring to, or to developing countries, whatever? Were you referring to other countries dumping products in third world countries, or could you clarify that?
What I was referring to was, yes, other countries dumping products in third world countries.
And you said that was beneficial for the developing countries?
Yes.
Okay. Wouldn't you agree that developing countries need to build up their own local economy?
But product dumping can help build up the local economy because allowing them to get goods for cheaper allows them to have more surplus money on an individual basis.
But oftentimes dumping creates monopolies for foreign businesses, and destroys local markets. So how would you say, how could that help the local businesses?
Your question was referring to the local economy, right?
Right. So sorry, let me rephrase that.
Could you please? That would help.
I apologize.
Thank you, sir.
So how exactly would the monopolies of foreign businesses help local economy in a developing country?
Well, on the subject of monopolies there, anti-dumping laws can create domestic monopolies as well, so
right.
it's really
Monopolies can occur on either side, but my point is, developing countries need to, wouldn't you agree that developing countries need to worry about their own economic success first and foremost?
I don't see how the two are necessarily mutually exclusive.
Okay, well, what?
1 minute.
Okay. So you said in your resolve that that you want to adjust. Can you explain exactly how these laws would be amended, the anti-dumping legislation? What is your plan for it?
We really just want them to ease the restrictions on dumping because as at the moment they're being used for unfair and biased purposes.
Okay, but in what way would they be eased up? Like what specifically would be changed about them?
Well, right now, the legislation is just very unclear, so it becomes very easy for countries to just pile on constant anti-dumping regulations and laws.
Okay,
so we want a clarification of the existing laws.
Okay, so the clarification, but the current restrictions on dumping could continue.
No, we want the restrictions to be eased.
Eased, okay, but you're saying clarification and even, do you want?
Hello, my name is Emily, and I am doing the negative side. Our aims are, we the negative feel passionately that we should maintain the current anti-dumping laws as laid out by the World Trade Organization. So first, listening to your speech, Ben, it was very eloquently said, I really liked it. However, I think that part 1 was very vague, and I didn't really understand, I wasn't very clear on it. I got, limits competition, unbiased code of conduct, no international trade, but I didn't really understand, because you touched on all those points in later harms, so I wasn't really sure, what the exact harm 1 was. Harm 2 I'm going to address, which was the financial burden on the consumers, and I'd like to talk about how do the consumers really benefit from having a cheaper product? Because if you look at the Tom's example, which I know we all read, it was, they're getting free shoes and, all the other shoe producers in that company are going out of business. And does that really help the consumers though? Because wouldn't you want to look at, is there something in the soil that's, getting into their feet, hookworms or something like that, look at the underlying problem instead of, creating something sustainable instead of just kind of giving them handouts. Do you know what I'm saying? So for harm 3, you did, that is subjective. And I'd like to take a minute to talk about nominal value review. So nominal value under Article 6 of the General Agreement of Tariffs and Trade in 1994 is defined as dumping as when the export price is less than the normal value. The normal value is adjusted as comparable domestic price, export price of a third company, or cost of production plus a reasonable addition for selling costs and profit. Dumping, Anti-Dumping, Economy Watch 30, June 2010. And harm 4, domestic company monopolies. Domestic companies create monopolies. So you're not really talking about the foreign businesses making monopolies. They come in because there's one price for everything, in developed nations, and they want to make more on their profit. As in harm 5, you mentioned there's an overstock, so they want to sell it somewhere else. And you're not really focusing on how they create monopolies in third world countries or developing nations sometimes. And harm 6 is international trade would stop. And I'd like to talk about predatory pricing and price discrimination, and obviously dumping is a big factor of predatory pricing and price discrimination. And we all know what price discrimination is. It's, when you get a plane ticket and the businessman sitting next to you doesn't pay as much as you do because you wouldn't have paid as much as he did because he needed the ticket and you want it for other reasons. So now I'm going to go into our first inherency. Corporations are profit-driven, otherwise known as profit maximization. They seek highest efficiency and pursue self-interest. Even charitable companies are too blind by profit to realize they are not creating a sustainable environment abroad. We're all global cities majors and we want what's best for the world, right? So why go in and say, oh, you know, we have an overstock, we need more money, we're gonna sell it less, we're probably gonna make a monopoly in the other country. So wouldn't you want to focus on sustainability abroad instead of that? Inherency 2. Markets are affected by product dumping. It has been felt that China is by no means a fair trade partner and is capturing the Indian market at a very fast pace through anti-competitive trade practices, such as predatory pricing. Predatory pricing involves priced products below cost with the intention of acquiring market. The intention is to recover the losses through future price increases. So predatory pricing is obviously really sneaky, and so obviously it hurts the market. Because the predatory pricing, other competitors, domestic ones, are driven out of the business because they can't compete with the low prices without losing money. So this is a monopoly that the foreign businesses are making in the domestic market. Inherency 3. Dumping is said to be the most common form of price discrimination in international trade. I already touched upon the subject. Harm 1. Dumping hurts the market. Like I said, predatory pricing and price discrimination, it potentially creates a monopoly in the domestic market, and it does hurt consumers in the long run without creating sustainable solutions. Harm 2, cultural capitalism. You combine acts of goodwill with acts of consumption, causes dumping. This is also seen by Inherency 1. We feel like it's good to do something, or we're giving that $25 to save a child, but are you really doing anything sustainable? You're not really helping them at all. Harm 3, if there's a high elasticity on export sales than on domestic sales, firms will dump. So this goes back to that whole concept that capitalism, corporations, they want the highest, they want to do what's efficient, and they want to get the most price for everything. And that's why they're dumping, and that's why they're creating monopolies domestically, and that's why they're hurting the third world countries. Harm 4. Not imposing regulation would encourage markets with fixed pricing to go elsewhere and create imperfect competition by selling their products at a low price than domestic ones, thus creating a monopoly. Placing anti-dumping laws are useful, but we also should revisit the goals of corporatization, governments, and institutions shaped from profit maximization and highest efficiency to fairness and sustainability. Our solvency, we want to maintain the current dumping laws of the World Trade Organization. Provisions are defined dumping, offers tips on how to measure its impact on a country's domestic industry, and how to report and investigate any case that involves dumping. And this goes back to the normal value that I laid out for you by the GATT. Not imposing regulation would encourage markets with fixed pricing to go elsewhere. And this is what I said before, creating monopolies in third world countries. And capitalism or profit maximization is therefore the problem. Placing anti-dumping laws would not solve the fundamental problem. And like I said before, we have to change the goals of corporations. So to go back, which I think is one of our strongest points, is that you're focusing on how efficient companies are. You know, you're trying to limit their overstock, and you're saying no waste, like it's cheaper over there, so why don't we sell over there, and we're gonna make money, it's all gonna be great. But you don't really realize what you're doing to the consumers. And yes, you know, the consumers may be like, oh, you know, there's a lower price, so obviously I'm gonna get that product, but how is that gonna affect them in the long run? And how does that benefit them at all if a foreign company is essentially creating a monopoly in their country? Obviously the government wouldn't be able to do anything about it, and people are just, I don't know, that's going to be so many jobs lost
So do you own a pair of Toms? No. Okay, great. We live in a capitalist economy. Under current laws, all companies have to make a profit, and that's kind of the goal of the society that we live in. So, aren't they just simply following the status quo relayed by the government?
I think that's what we're trying to change. So I agree with you, and that's what we're trying to change.
How would you change that?
Well, we're just saying that that's another solution. So our main solvency is that we keep the anti-dumping laws of the World Trade Organization, and that there has to be more done to it. But we don't exactly have, anything backing it up.
Okay, well, how do you make that assumption when the anti-dumping laws are so weak right now? The governments aren't really enforcing it very well, so how is that actually helping?
Do you have proof that the anti-dumping laws are weak?
Because dumping isn't currently working, and the anti-dumping laws aren't working in a lot of countries, so.
What specific countries?
Okay, well, we're going to move on. So what is an example of this? You mentioned sustainability as an example. So how markets should work in a sustainable way rather than a capitalistic way. So what is an example of a sustainable action that you're addressing that could work?
For fear of going outside the articles. I will say Rhode is one of the companies that have a sustainable, they give back to the third world countries instead of just taking from them and kind of giving them handouts like Tom does.
Okay. So it seems like subsidies are the roots of the problem when it comes to dumping cases, but since there are already regulations for subsidies that cause unfair competition, anti-dumping laws aren't necessarily going to make any change then, right? Or how would you argue that anti-dumping laws are going to affect this change?
Sorry, can you repeat that?
Yeah, so subsidies are what lead to dumping a lot of times, and so how do you argue, because there's a lot of regulations.
But they're not always
subsidies,
good.
but how are anti-dumping laws going to change this? So how are anti-dumping laws going to make a difference for these countries?
Well, it would limit monopolies probably that, have occurred, and it's going to benefit consumers in the long run. So that instead of,
Okay, well,
Okay. Hello, my name is Kate, and I'm representing the second affirmative constructive. I'm going to be extending all my previous points. I'm going to be addressing the negative points, the faulty negative points, and elaborating on our intent to help the global economy. So you mentioned that harm one is big. Let me just go over harm one. Anti-dumping laws have the potential to limit the variety and quality of products available to the consumer and limit competition between countries. Originally designed as a weapon against predatory and powerful companies, the role of anti-dumping measures has changed from ensuring fair competition to protecting inefficient competitors. They are being increasingly used as inefficient producers, especially from developing countries. So, because anti-dumping laws have decreased competition abroad, consumers have fewer products to choose from when picking an item to buy. This leads to a decrease in innovation because countries are not competing to make the best product. So, if you remember the example of the solar panels. Yes, the amount of the China producing the solar panels is hurting the European government economy because they can't keep up with the production of Chinese solar panels. These are solar panels we're talking about that's helping the economy in the long run. Because China has produced these solar panels, now in Europe, the price of solar panels is about the same price as electric, and that's helping the environment in the long run. So if we want to talk about systems thinking, and the system at the heart of this, we're helping the environment, the world as a whole, because we're having this healthy competition that's driving innovation. So that's not very big at all. The truth is, renewable energy industry does not need more policy support. It needs to focus on modifying its business model to profitably compete in a competitive market without subsidies. It needs to use time until the current state RPS goals are satisfied to reduce the balance of system costs, streamline permitting processes, advocating for dynamic pricing and positioning itself to beat China by offering a better product and a better deal. So, instead of relying on anti-dumping laws and similar policies to protect a weakened industry, renewable energy companies should be focusing on making better products and offering better deals. Okay, another point that you kept mentioning is you're worried about these giant monopolies taking over the world in other countries. Well, what about the monopolies in, say, and I'm assuming you're probably talking about China and everything. What about the monopolies in America that are taking over and hurting, say, the third world countries? Dumping is creating this healthy competition that's also limiting the monopolies in other countries as well. So it's kind of like a give and take. Okay. Dumping benefits the consumer in the importing country who can buy the products at cheaper rates. The losers are consumers in the exporting country. As seen by this quote, the act of dumping benefits the consumers within the country that the dumping is occurring, as they now have access to cheaper goods. So a main point here is that the people who, if dumping is all of a sudden taken away, and we're immediately going to notice a rise in prices because of this. What about people living below the poverty line who can barely survive on a minimum wage job? They need these products from Price Right, from whatever, from Walmart, that are allowing them to survive. And what kind of solutions would you have if all of a sudden you took away dumping and now you had these people that couldn't survive on the domestic products? What kind of plans would you have there? We live in a capitalistic world. We're all competing for the same resources. If one country can provide a cheaper product that is worth the same quality, then they should be allowed to sell it. That is the basic principle of what drives a market economy. Anti-dumping actions are only valid if dumping creates an injury to the competing market. The WTO agreement allows governments to act against dumping where there is genuine material injury to the competing domestic industry. In order to do that, the government is able to show that dumping is taking place. Calculate the extent of dumping, how much lower the export price is compared to the exporter's home market price, and show that dumping is causing injury or threatening to do so. So anti-dumping action means charging extra import duty on a particular product from the exporting country in order to bring its price closer to the normal value or removing the injury to domestic industry in the importing country. Calculating the extent of dumping is not enough. Anti-dumping measures can only be applied if the dumping is hurting the industry in the importing country. But the way regulations are going now, it is not straightforward. Anti-dumping measures must expire 5 years after the date of imposition, unless its investigation shows that ending the measure will lead to injury. They also must end if the margin of dumping is insignificantly small, defined as less than 2% of the export price of the product. This measure also has to end the volume of dumped imports is negligible, less than 3% of imports. Anti-dumping gives countries no place to put their surplus products that the companies make. This creates a vast amount of waste and loss of profit, as we said before. In the Economic and Legal Analysis of Dumping by Shruti Oha, the list of benefits of dumping on the exporting country, number 1, states, it finds a market for its surplus production. When a company has flooded their own domestic economy, their product is still there. They need to receive a return on their investment. The best way to do so is to enter a market where the product does not exist. This way, they are available to get a return on their product. The The concept of dumping seems fair because it's recognized that producers may sell their goods in different markets at different prices, and that prices of goods are influenced by several market forces and may vary at different times. It may be a perfectly legitimized business activity like discounts offered by airlines to students or senior citizens. They may not seem anything intrinsically unethical or illegal about dumping. Time?
Sorry, 30 seconds.
Oh, okay. So the price of goods are not determined by one specific factor. That is why it's unfair to assume that international trades are always trying to exploit the importing country through dumping methods. There are other economic factors that come into play. The normal value of goods may vary from time to time. Yeah.
Good? Ready to go? Okay. So you talked a lot about the use of solar panels and how they are beneficial for creating sustainability. But do you have any proof that these solar panels, when they were actually manufactured, were manufactured cleanly?
Cleanly? What do you mean by cleanly?
Cleanly, like if like not polluted, like what they're trying to promote, because solar panels are trying to promote sustainability
Yes.
and energy efficiency. Were these created efficiently or cleanly? Okay.
Yes.
What proof do you have? Apparently not. Okay.
Can you prove that they weren't?
Can you prove that they were? Can I prove that they were? You're not allowed to. All right. Okay.
You didn't cut her off.
You did cut her. We'll move on anyway. You also talked about the monopolies in the United States and in America and how they're being taken over. Did you know? Do you know the actual current state of monopolies in general in the United States?
Monopolies in the United States exist, and
well, according to my partners, they said that monopolies. Sorry, monopolies in the United States. You can't currently have them at all. Do you know that?
in the United States we're following the capitalistic laws.
I'm not saying you can't have them. I'm saying it's illegal. Did you know that?
Okay, perhaps. But
Yes or no?
the fact is that we're creating competition with big businesses.
Do you know the current law? What is the current law? Do you just know it? Or not? Yes or no?
No.
Okay. Next question. You addressed the idea about China, but aren't we just kind of helping China in a sense?
Because we're buying their products.
No, not that we're buying their products, just the fact that we are helping them and promoting like healthy competition and such.
Yes, we're promoting healthy competition. I think that's the whole point. I think that's necessary.
Okay.
Hi everybody, my name is Victoria and I'm representing the negative side. I will be doing the PNC. So basically, my speech is going to further address the negative points and clarify some misunderstandings of the affirmative. The first thing I'm going to go into is inherency 2. Markets are affected by product dumping. So we've been talking about predatory pricing, which involves pricing products below cost with the intention of acquiring markets. The intention is to recover the losses through future price increases. But if we look at India and China, we see that China poses the greatest threat to Indian industry at this juncture. In this time of global recession, dumping can become a serious issue. India has filed 17 WTO cases against China since October 2008. The number of dumping complaints may reflect a struggle to cope with trade deficits. So why would we support this? Inherency 3, dumping is said to be the most common form of price discrimination in international trade. Dumping hurts a country's domestic industry and producers and impacts the sales volume, hurts the market shares, triggers decline in profitability, and leads to job losses. You're saying that people are currently not surviving. What is your basis for that? People are not surviving right now because there is dumping. We are focused on the system. We are sorry, I'm like
You got it. You're good. You're good. Yeah. You can do it.
I'm very silent. Through cultural capitalism, we combine acts of goodwill with acts of consumption. Consider how else you can spend those $25 you invested. If the aim of wearing shoes is to prevent soil-borne diseases such as hookworm, then $25 will go much further if it is invested in sanitation. The foreign economy and their markets take advantage of holes in the system and are squeezing profits where they can. They are taking advantage of local people. Firms dump their products in places where they know their people will buy it because the situation is so bad. Through the frenzy of do-gooder consumption, we stop thinking all the way through. We fail to ask how our money will help, and we overlook how our good deeds might actually do harm. We forget that what we want to do for others might not be the same as they really need. The negative is really focused on morality argument. Domestic producers want to build up our economies first, and we must remember to think globally and act locally. Monopoly of domestic all people are connected, and if one person goes out of business because of such high dumping, then everybody will go out of business. I mean, look at our recession. Why would we support something like that in another country? And as part of our solvency, we also have to bring up the argument for microfinancing rather than dumping. And it is an alternative system. And through microfinancing, we can promote smaller investments to further develop the economies of our country instead of just completely destroying them. Also, with monopolies, usually monopolies just, it's not about just giving like the lowest cost. The monopolies will dumping hurts a country's domestic industry, and producers impact the sales volume, hurting the market shares. It triggers decline in profitability and leads to job losses. A survey conducted by Federation of Indian Chambers of Commerce and Industry highlighted that majority of small and medium-sized manufacturers have suffered a serious erosion of their Indian market share over the past year because of cheaper Chinese products. It is also estimated that the Chinese imports were 10 to 70% cheaper than comparable Indian products.
2 minutes.
Okay. The affirmative has been saying that if an economy has a surplus of goods, then these goods will be wasted if we don't dump. But if an economy has a surplus of goods, take responsibility and adjust. Why put these burdens on other countries? The affirmative also says that, or they're worried about monopolies, or American monopolies, but they are creating foreign monopolies and knocking out competition via dumping. So, just to reiterate the harms, dumping will hurt a country's domestic industry and producers, and it hurts the market shares, and it triggers decline and profitability, and it leads to job losses. And like I said, everybody is connected, so when one person loses a job, then everybody else loses a job. It's not just about finding the lowest price and being selfish that way.
4 seconds.
4 seconds. And yeah, I know mine.
Victoria,
Yeah,
you brought up the case of both India and China.
yeah.
But India and China both suffer from some of the greatest poverty in the world, with the most people living below the poverty level of all the countries in the world. How do you justify placing a heavy financial burden upon the people living below this poverty level?
I think there would be more of a financial burden if we keep making prices go down, because it really affects the local industries and the local economy. So I think in the long term that will be a bigger harm.
But wouldn't you agree that these access to cheap goods allows each individual person to have surplus money in their own pocket?
I think we have to go back to the whole idea of predatory pricing, and like through predatory pricing, it's not really pricing to do good. Like prices aren't low just because companies know that people can't afford it. It's for a benefit, and prices also go up when people want to buy the product.
Okay, thank you. You mentioned microfinancing. Please elaborate on the strategy to help the economy as an alternative to dumping.
Like I said before, through microfinancing, we can promote smaller investments to develop the economies of the country. So basically just going back to basics and supplementing.
And where will that money come from?
Well, the government, I mean, the money definitely won't come from foreign companies.
But where will it come from?
Probably internally.
Okay. You mentioned certain health issues like hookworm. Do you know how hookworm begins?
Well, I know that people not wearing shoes can definitely.
Right. So how can you deny giving a child a pair of shoes when they are susceptible to health issues like hookworm without shoes?
I'm not saying that children should not have shoes. What I'm saying is if we have too many free shoes, then local people can't make the shoes. That's all I'm saying.
Okay. Victoria, many countries do not even have enough trade personnel to have a representative at the World Trade Organization. So wouldn't you agree that this hinders the fairness of anti-dumping cases that are brought to the World Trade Organization?
No, I think it highlights the root of the problem. The root of the problem is that these...
Okay, then how do you propose to balance that inequality, if that's the root of the problem?
Well, the negative side isn't proposing any new policy. It's just saying that it should strengthen what we have now.
By the World Trade Organization? So that change should come from the World Trade Organization, is that what you're saying?
No, we're not saying that. We're saying that we're not saying change. We're saying change within, not change.
You are saying change.
Yeah, I'm not. I'm saying maintain the WTOs.
Okay, but clearly those aren't, as you're arguing, those aren't effective enough right now. So how do you propose to change those to make them more effective?
Sorry, that was my appearance. Ryan, and I will be presenting the first negative rebuttal, and I'm going to talk about why we won and the major flaws in the affirmative argument. First of all, I'm going to talk about the situation as a whole. The magnitude. Dumping is a major global issue, and amending these laws, as you would have suggested, would have an incredibly negative impact on local economies throughout the world, which in turn would have a major negative impact on the global economy. Timeline. How possible would it be to amend these laws? Well, let's look at amending at a smaller scale, something a little closer to home. Let's look at amending laws in the United States. The House of Representatives has been at a standstill about our government was shut down a few weeks ago, even if you don't recall. So we know that amending legislation is an incredibly long and painstaking process. And as far as timeline for what we're saying, it's already implemented. It's already officially legislation. So there is no amount of time that we have to change to adjust what's going on. And so what's the probability? How likely would it be for this to change? In addition to how long it would take to amend this law, the vast majority of countries are in support of this legislation and are vehemently anti-dumping. So as I did previously, I'm going to continue bringing it back to a local scale. We talked a lot about domestic markets, but I'm going to continue talking about that because I think it is incredibly important. You said that consumers benefit from this, from dumping, and you did actually say that you admitted that, especially you used the solar panel example, that European manufacturers are hurt by this, correct? So you say that, but I would make the argument that that consumers are hurt in the long run because one, domestic markets are crushed. Dumping, it's not a secret that dumping hurts local manufacturers and local economies. So, if the local market's crushed, people lose jobs. They won't have money to even buy the cheapest possible goods that you have said will be coming in from dumping. Furthermore, lost my train of thought. So, anyway, you all, sorry. Okay, so, dumping hurts as this is a quote we mentioned before, but I think it's really important to understand. Dumping hurts a country's domestic industry, producers, and impacts the sales volume, hurts the market shares, triggers decline in profitability, and leads to job losses. So, while you say that it benefits the consumer, that is very short-term thinking. In the long term, they will lose their jobs. They will not even have the money to buy the cheap goods that are currently offered to them. And so I'm also going to go through history a little bit. You talk about how developing countries benefit from dumping and how that it helps them because they need the cheap goods to survive. The biggest economic boom in the United States was during the Industrial Revolution, right? And that was a time when the United States had an incredibly isolationist policy towards international trade. We were focusing on building up our own economies. So, how then would you recommend that developing countries build up their economies if they are supporting foreign monopolies? How much time did you say before?
You're 1 minute.
1 minute, okay. So, in conclusion, we have won because while you made some fair arguments, in the end, the dumping has a much larger negative impact on consumers in the long term and will crush local markets and local countries in economies in local countries. So you can say that, yes, but it's capitalism, it's survival of the fittest. But if countries' economies are being destroyed, monopolies will be made in foreign countries, and it'll hurt people in the long term. And we also brought up predatory pricing. This is what I was meant to say before and lost my train of thought. When companies come in and the local markets are crushed, not only will people not have money to buy the cheap goods, companies come in and raise the prices of goods once the local markets are destroyed. So it won't, in the end, the prices are going to be the same as they are if the same as they are if they buy local or more expensive. So in what way does that help developing countries?
Hello, my name is Emily, and I'm going to be representing the first affirmative rebuttal. So to start off with, the magnitude of the problem. If anti-dumping laws become more strict, consumers will suffer under the burden of heightened product costs. The economy of the exporting country will also suffer because their surplus products will be wasted and they will lose profits and a major competitive advantage. The time frame of this problem we see is that we will see the effects of strict anti-dumping laws immediately with increased product prices and wasted surplus items. These laws will also discourage competitive global trade. And the probability that increased anti-dumping laws will affect the global economy is very high. The probability that prices will increase is 100% likely, and if anti-dumping laws do become more strict, then global trade will most definitely suffer, which in turn will lead many countries' economies to diminish in productivity. So as the negative side had brought up, they failed to mention that they wanted change for the anti-dumping laws. They actually maintained that anti-dumping laws should stay as they are, which goes against their entire argument. So they kind of countered what they were saying in that side. Also, they did not even address subsidies, which is the root cause of dumping. So how can you argue in favor of dumping when you don't even mention the cause of what it is causing? Also, we live in a capitalist world where we are all competing for the same resources. And if one country can provide a cheaper product worth the same quality, they should be able to produce it. That is the basic principle of what drives our market economy. They are arguing that we should eliminate trade by reducing these dumping laws, and we believe that competition is good. It's good for the consumers, it's good for the individual to rise to the demand. Competition is a good thing, and it drives everyone to succeed and to produce the best product they can. It creates healthy competition. Anti-dumping is only valid if dumping creates an injury to the competing market, and they did not address that anti-dumping laws create injuries to the market. And we also believe that there is no place to put export products without anti-dumping laws. There's no place to put a surplus product, and that hinders national economies, which hinders international trade. Also, efficient producers are being punished by reducing their ability to be competitive in a global economy because they are not able to have their products sold internationally. 2 minutes. So, also, the negative side argued in favor of eliminating monopolies because that's what they believe the anti-dumping laws create. But we argue that, and in fact, eliminating anti-dumping laws would create domestic monopolies, which would have the potential to, so the domestic markets have the potential to create a monopoly in their home country, which would hinder the economy in the national level. Local markets aren't actually crushed. It's rather, it helps the consumers to be able to benefit from cheaper products that are produced abroad, so they get cheaper products, and that helps the consumers. Like I said before, anti-dumping actions are only valid if dumping creates an injury to the competing market, and as you can see from these standards aren't necessarily in place a lot of times, and the WTO does not do a good job of regulating this. 1 minute. Anti-dumping measures can only be applied if the dumping is hurting the industry in the importing country, but the way the regulations go now, it is not as straightforward. The negative side failed to address that administrative costs and profits vary among countries and companies, so there is an inherent subjectivity to the approach of using anti-dumping laws. We believe that anti-dumping overall would help keep competition intact in our global economy, and that without anti-dumping laws, or without dumping, there would be a reduction in competition, which would lead to less benefit for economies, and would lead to actually reduction in standard of living and economy of the country.
Okay, the following that I'm going to talk about is why we, the negative, have won this debate and why the affirmative should not. From the beginning, we clearly stated that we are passionately about maintaining that the current anti-dumping legislation promoted by the World Trade Organization should stay as it is and shall be maintained. Your team, one of the main things Emily addressed in hers, she said that dumping is a negative thing for our economy. Since we are building bigger, since these bigger countries are what's controlling everything and are the main drivers in the whole global economy, what about the other developing nations? Shouldn't we focus on these, and not only focus on these, but focus on our own local economies? Without building up our own local economies, how can we address global economies, and how can we build those up? One of the main things Emily addressed in her rebuttal is saying that we didn't even address subsidies, and they believe, as Emily stated, that subsidies are the main cause of dumping. Except, aren't there other causes than just subsidies? It's not really, I think though, about focusing on the causes, but rather the solutions. We're trying to find a solution to this, and we believe that the solution is maintaining the current state, exemplified by the World Trade Organization. Emily also addressed the idea of healthy competition, and that this can promote competition among them, and not only mean competition, but it can, competition is a good thing. Emily said that the competition is a good thing, but monopolies, as we stated previously, just eliminate competition overall. And the affirmative side even conceded that dumping creates foreign monopolies. One flaw that we found in their argument is they never exactly gave any specific examples of the World Trade Organization failing, except that it's a blurred lines. So one of our main arguments is that as global studies majors, and all of us knowing how important it is, how interconnected the world is, and how much we rely on these interconnections between other countries, especially not only the developing countries, but also the developed countries, but also those ones that are developing and stuff, and working with those. So our main argument, I think, is the moral issue behind the whole subject. We talk a lot about in global studies about the whole think globally, act locally, and stuff. And I think this can relate to this debate because it's important that the countries focus on their own countries and developing their own countries and doing things within their own country, and this will have ramifications on the whole globe. Emily addressed another point that I thought was important. She said, what happens to the people? She said that in the long run you are hurting the domestic producers and hurting the general being of the country. But is that really what you're proposing? As I've said a lot, we should not only focus on reducing competition, but promoting collaboration, I think, is important. And as I said, that starts within our own countries. And by focusing on collaboration, I think, as we all have seen throughout our course, that so much more can come of collaboration rather than competition. Competition just drives us apart and drives the economy down. But in order to build up the economy, we need to work together. So as global studies majors, it's important to understand this whole interconnectedness of the world. The affirmative side is promoting exploitation instead of conservation, but is that really what we're all about? I think global studies and just everything we've learned is all about conserving and sustainability. We need to focus on what we're doing now to focus on what the ramifications will be for the future. That's why we believe we should stick with the World Trade Organization's current anti-dumping legislation, because it seems to be working, and as we've seen in the past with many forms of legislation, it takes such a long time to change anything and stuff, and as the current state of legislation is as it is, it's the best way that we can do it.
Hello, my name is Emma, and I am speaking to you now to let you know why we as the affirmative side have won this debate. Many points made by the negative side are both unrealistic and invalid, and I will elaborate on those now. You mentioned that we did not bring up the domestic monopolies that are created due to anti-dumping. However, if you would listen more closely, we did mention them both in the case of India and China. Your point on monopolies is invalid because anti-dumping laws also help to create these domestic monopolies that I just mentioned. So the point is moot. Monopolies will happen regardless of if anti-dumping laws are in place or not. Second, your point suggests that eliminating competition, suggests the importance of eliminating competition, but doesn't our economy survive and thrive off of healthy competition? This competition helps to keep the prices low. As Kate Fusco mentioned earlier, the importance of buying jeans at $100 that could be made much cheaper due to this competition is very important to producers and investors worldwide within the global economy. The negative side brought up the point of sustainability through microfinance, but provided no concrete examples of how to carry this act of microfinance out. We can dream all we want, but no change can be made without realistic proposals. The negative side is arguing that local producers should be able to compete, but this cannot happen if the producers cannot even afford basic human necessities to create their products. The act of dumping allows these basic human necessities to be provided at a cheaper cost within international markets. They mentioned that companies should take responsibility for their own surplus and adjust to eliminate this surplus. But the market demands are so rapidly changing that there is no way of determining how many products will be needed to be made by each company individually. There will always be surplus, so why not sell that surplus within international markets in order to eliminate this waste? This is where the act of responsibility comes in on the basis of each company. The issue of human rights was not adequately or fully addressed by the negative side. How can we expect to help third world countries if we deny them access to affordable goods? As we mentioned numerous times, access to these goods allows members of developing countries to save money, in turn allowing them to maintain a living wage for them and their families. The negative side has failed to address this basic moral issue. You mentioned the importance of collaboration, but did not say how. You proposed to support the World Trade Organization, but the World Trade Organization does not support a collaborative economy. It promotes a fair, competitive economy. And as I mentioned before, this competition is what helps to maintain those low prices. Healthy competition. Most importantly, the negative side is arguing that simply maintaining the current anti-dumping laws, but these anti-dumping laws are clearly ineffective, as in the case of India and China, most importantly. Dumping is very present and is never punished by these laws that the negative side is proposing to use as their method of change. You mentioned blurred lines, but we see these blurred lines as ineffective and a cause of failure by the World Trade Organization. These laws are currently not effective and not carried out, and see no consequences by the companies that use them. So why is it valuable that you are proposing to maintain these ineffective laws that are currently in place? We see the issue of sustainability as very valid, but without concrete examples of how the sustainability is occurring, the status quo is currently what is working the best. The dumping that happens within companies is allowing these cheap goods to be provided in international economies. And as Kate Fusco mentioned before,
before, like I just said, these cheap goods are not only important within international economies, but also domestic economies. I'm sure each of us as individual consumers can feel the effect of that, and particularly as college students. As I mentioned before, the moral issue of human rights is at stake. How can you act to deny these human and moral rights to members of the developing countries, and how can we propose to offer aid to these developing countries if we deny them their ability to maintain a living wage? The anti-dumping laws, if they were effective, as I proved that they are not, the anti-dumping laws would deny these people of their basic ability to live and survive and thrive within their own economies. That maintains the current gap wage between the first world and the third world, and simply continues to extend those problems that are currently existing. So your point of maintaining those laws is ineffective, as they are currently not strongly enforced. And as I mentioned, finally, in conclusion, as I mentioned before, your support of the World Trade Organization is counteractive to your point. The World Trade Organization does not support collaboration, as you mentioned. It simply supports the healthy competition that we mentioned between companies and corporations within the international economy. This healthy competition is what keeps the prices low. It's not the current ineffective anti-dumping laws that are in place.